Little boy says, "Hey sir, my dad has a birthmark just like yours." The billionaire is shocked. It was an ordinary day in the park, the kind where laughter filled the air, and the rustling of leaves created a soothing melody. Families gathered around picnic tables, children raced each other down winding paths, and the warm glow of the afternoon sun cast everything in a golden light. Amid this cheerful scene, a little boy, no more than 6 years old, stood clutching a soccer ball, his curious eyes fixed on a man sitting alone on a bench. The man was well-dressed, his tailored suit and polished shoes standing out in stark contrast to the casual attire of the parkgoers. His face was calm, though there was a certain weight in his eyes, as if his mind were busy untangling the threads of a life far removed from this simple, happy moment. This was Ethan Blake, a billionaire known for his sharp business acumen, his quiet demeanor, and a private life so guarded it left the media with little to report beyond rumors and speculation. He was rarely seen in public like this, and no one seemed to recognize him, except for the little boy. The boy hesitated at first, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, clutching the ball tightly against his chest. But then, with the unfiltered bravery only children seem to possess, he took a few steps forward, his small sneakers crunching against the gravel path. His gaze didn't waver as he approached the man. Ethan noticed the boy from the corner of his eye, but didn't give it much thought. He had grown accustomed to people approaching him for various reasons, though a child this young was an unusual sight. The boy stopped just a few feet away, tilting his head as if studying Ethan closely, and then, with a cheerful and innocent voice that carried far beyond its size, he said something that made Ethan's heart stop. "Hey sir," the boy said, his tone as casual as if he were talking to an old friend. "My dad has a birthmark, just like yours." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Ethan's hand froze mid-air as he reached for the coffee cup beside him. He turned to the boy, his brows furrowing slightly in confusion. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with a quiet urgency. The boy pointed, his small finger aimed at the faint birthmark on Ethan's neck, just below his ear. It wasn't something Ethan thought about much. It had always been there, a detail so mundane he hardly noticed it anymore. But the boy's words hit like a thunderclap, echoing in Ethan's mind and stirring a memory he thought he had buried long ago. Ethan's heart began to race, though he tried to keep his composure. He leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied the boy. There was something oddly familiar about him, the shape of his face, the brightness in his eyes. He opened his mouth to ask a question, but the boy spoke first. "Yeah," the boy continued, as if this were the most normal conversation in the world. "It's kind of the same shape, like a little crescent moon. My mom says it's cool. She says not many people have marks like that." Ethan felt the air grow heavier around him. A crescent moon-shaped birthmark. It wasn't just rare, it was unique, so unique that Ethan had only ever seen one other person with the exact same mark. The memory came rushing back like a tidal wave, overwhelming and vivid. Years ago, before the boardrooms and skyscrapers, before the wealth and fame, there was a life Ethan had left behind. A life filled with choices he'd rather not revisit, and people he had vowed to never seek out again. But one person from that life had always lingered in the back of his mind, a ghost he could never quite forget. "Who's your dad?" Ethan asked, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. The boy grinned, seemingly thrilled that this well-dressed stranger was taking an interest in him. "My dad's name is Michael," he said proudly. "Michael Parker. Do you know him?" Ethan's world tilted, the name hitting him like a punch to the gut. Michael Parker. It wasn't just a name, it was the name. The person he had walked away from all those years ago, leaving behind more than just a friendship. He had left behind a bond, a history, a family he thought he could never face again. Ethan struggled to mask the turmoil brewing inside him. The boy's bright eyes stared back at him, innocent and unaware of the storm he had just unleashed. Ethan wanted to ask 1,000 questions about Michael, about the boy's mother, about the life they had built together. But he knew he couldn't let his emotions show. Not here, not now. The boy, oblivious to Ethan's internal struggle, suddenly turned and called out, "Dad. Hey, Dad." Ethan's breath caught as he followed the boy's gaze. Walking toward them was a man, tall, with a confident stride and a warm smile. He looked different now, older and more refined, but there was no mistaking him. It was Michael. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. Michael's smile faltered, his expression morphing into one of shock and disbelief. Ethan's hands tightened into fists, his mind racing. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was something else entirely, fate, destiny, or perhaps a reckoning. And as Michael closed the gap between them, the question hung heavy in the air. How do you face the past when it comes rushing back, unannounced and unavoidable? What happens next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned to find out how this unexpected encounter unfolds, and why this little boy's innocent words might just change everything. Ethan sat frozen, watching Michael approach with the little boy by his side. His heart pounded in his chest as a flood of emotions and memories washed over him. It had been over a decade since he last saw Michael, and the sight of him now felt surreal. Michael looked older, of course, but there was a warmth in his face and an ease in his demeanor that Ethan didn't recognize. It was clear that life had shaped him in ways Ethan could only guess at. "Ethan?" Michael's voice broke the silence, low and filled with disbelief. "Is that really you?" Ethan stood, brushing invisible dust off his suit, a nervous habit he had developed over the years. "Michael," he replied, his voice steady but strained. "It's been a long time." The little boy, now standing between them, looked up at his dad and then back at Ethan, his face glowing with curiosity. "You know him, Dad?" he asked eagerly. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes still locked on Ethan. "Yeah," he said, his tone carrying a mix of surprise and something deeper, something unresolved. "We used to know each other a long time ago." The boy, oblivious to the tension, grinned. "Cool? He's nice. He let me talk to him. And he has the same birthmark as you." Ethan swallowed hard, glancing at Michael, whose expression shifted ever so slightly. It was a small moment, but Ethan caught it. A flicker of something unspoken. He knew that look. It was the same one Michael had when he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "I didn't expect to see you here," Ethan said, trying to keep his tone casual, though his hands were clenched tightly at his sides. Michael let out a short laugh, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, well, life's full of surprises, isn't it?" he said, his voice carrying an edge. "What brings you to this park?" Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure how to answer that question. The truth was, he often came to this park to escape. The world of boardrooms, deals, and endless demands had left him feeling empty, and he found solace in the simplicity of watching families and children enjoy their day. But how could he explain that to Michael, especially now? "I was just taking a break," Ethan said finally, "needed some fresh air." Michael nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "I see." The silence between them was heavy, filled with words neither of them dared to say. The little boy, sensing the shift in mood but not understanding it, tugged at his dad's hand. "Can we go play now, Dad?" Michael glanced down at his son and forced a smile. "Yeah, buddy. Just give me a minute, okay?" The boy nodded and ran off to join some other kids playing nearby. Ethan watched him go, his mind spinning. "He's your son," Ethan said quietly, more a statement than a question. Michael turned back to him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Yes, he is," he replied. "His name's Noah." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. "He's a great kid." "Thanks." Michael's voice was curt, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if it had been a mistake to say anything at all. The weight of their shared history hung between them like a fog, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the dam broke. There was too much left unsaid, too many unresolved feelings that had been buried for years. "Michael," Ethan began, his voice soft but firm, "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to see you, but now that I have..." He trailed off, unsure of how to continue. Michael's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he didn't respond. Then finally he said, "Why now, Ethan? Why are you here, in this park, of all places?" Do you even know how much you left behind when you walked away? The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had expected anger, but hearing it aloud was something else entirely. I didn't have a choice, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael's eyes flared with frustration. You always had a choice, he shot back. You just decided that your career, your ambitions were more important than anything else. Ethan looked away, guilt pressing down on him like a heavy weight. He wanted to defend himself, to explain, but deep down, he knew Michael was right. Back then, he had been so consumed by his desire to succeed that he had convinced himself that cutting ties was the only way forward. I thought I was doing the right thing, Ethan said finally, his voice thick with emotion. I thought I was protecting you, protecting both of us. Michael let out a bitter laugh. Protecting us? By disappearing without a word. By leaving me to pick up the pieces and figure out what went wrong. Ethan flinched, the raw pain in Michael's voice cutting deeper than he expected. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling inadequate even as he said them. Michael shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and sadness. Sorry doesn't change anything, Ethan. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't explain why you're standing here now, all these years later, acting like it's just another day. Before Ethan could respond, a voice called out from across the park. Michael. Both men turned to see a woman walking toward them, her stride confident but her expression curious. She was beautiful, with kind eyes and a warm smile, and Ethan immediately knew who she was. Michael's wife. As she approached, Michael seemed to tense, his shoulders stiffening. Ethan, he said, his tone low and warning. This is Anna, my wife. Ethan felt a pang of something he couldn't quite identify. Regret, jealousy, maybe even admiration. He extended a hand, forcing a polite smile. It's nice to meet you, Anna, he said. She shook his hand, her smile genuine but puzzled. You too, she replied. Michael didn't mention he was meeting a friend today. Michael cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. We weren't exactly meeting, he said. It's complicated. Anna looked between the two men, her brow furrowing slightly. Well, I hope you two are catching up, she said, her tone light but probing. Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned. Yeah, he said, catching up. As Anna walked toward Noah, who was still playing nearby, Michael turned back to Ethan, his expression hard. You shouldn't have come here, he said quietly. I didn't plan this, Ethan replied. But now that I'm here, I need to know the truth. About everything. Michael's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with unresolved pain. Be careful what you ask for, Ethan, he said. You might not like the answers. Ethan held his gaze, the tension between them thick enough to cut. He didn't know where this conversation was heading, but one thing was certain, the past wasn't going to stay buried any longer. Ethan stood there, staring at Michael, his mind racing with questions he was almost too afraid to ask. The tension between them was palpable, the weight of their shared past pressing down on both of them. But he couldn't walk away now, not after this unexpected encounter. He needed answers. Answers he had avoided seeking for years. Michael, Ethan said softly, his voice steady but filled with urgency. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but I need to know, is Noah? Michael's eyes widened, and for a moment Ethan saw a flicker of panic. Don't, Michael interrupted, his voice low but firm. Don't go there. Ethan's heart pounded. He could feel the truth lingering just beneath the surface, ready to erupt. Michael, he pressed, stepping closer, is Noah my son? Michael looked away, his jaw tightening. Ethan could see the internal struggle written all over his face. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Michael exhaled, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had finally become too much to bear. Yes, Michael said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Noah is your son. The words hit Ethan like a tidal wave, washing over him with a mix of shock, guilt, and something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He staggered back slightly, his mind struggling to process the revelation. My son, Ethan repeated, the words feeling foreign and yet deeply meaningful. He looked over at Noah, who was laughing and chasing another boy around the playground. His heart swelled with a mix of pride and regret. "You didn't tell me," Ethan said, turning back to Michael. "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael's eyes flashed with anger. "Tell you?" he said, his voice rising slightly. "You walked away, Ethan. You left without a word. How was I supposed to tell you? You made it clear that your career was more important than anything or anyone." Ethan flinched at the accusation, but he couldn't deny it. Back then, he had been so focused on building his empire that he had convinced himself that cutting ties was the only way to succeed. But hearing Michael's words now, he realized just how much he had lost in the process. "I was scared," Ethan admitted, his voice breaking. "Scared that I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't be the man you needed me to be. So I ran, and I've regretted it every single day since." Michael shook his head, his expression softening ever so slightly. "You don't get to just show up now and expect everything to be okay," he said. "You don't get to rewrite the past." "I'm not trying to rewrite the past," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. "I can't change what I did, but I can try to make things right. I want to be a part of Noah's life, if you'll let me." Michael studied him for a long moment, the conflict in his eyes evident. He glanced over at Anna, who was now helping Noah tie his shoelaces. Then he turned back to Ethan. "It's not just about me," Michael said quietly. "It's about him. He's a happy kid, Ethan. He has a good life. I won't let anything disrupt that, not even you." Ethan nodded, understanding the protective instinct behind Michael's words. "I don't want to disrupt anything," he said. "I just want to be there for him, however I can, even if it's just as a family friend." Michael raised an eyebrow. "A family friend?" Ethan smiled faintly, though his heart was heavy. "If that's all I can be, I'll take it," he said. "But I want to earn your trust, Michael. And I want to earn Noah's trust, too. I know it'll take time, but I'm willing to wait." Michael didn't respond right away. He looked down at the ground, his thoughts clearly racing. Finally, he sighed and met Ethan's gaze. "We'll take it slow," Michael said, his voice cautious but not unkind. "No promises, but we'll see how it goes." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Ethan watched Noah run toward them, his laughter filling the air. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he made a silent vow to himself. He would do everything in his power to make things right, not just for Michael, but for Noah too. And as Michael called out to his son, and Anna waved from a distance, Ethan realized something he hadn't before. Life was messy, complicated, and full of mistakes, but it was also full of second chances, if you were brave enough to take them. This wasn't the ending he had expected, but maybe it was the one he needed. A new beginning, waiting to be written.